Next week we're going to be talking about Joshua, then Rahab, then David, then John the Baptist, then Stephen. So I think it's going to be some really neat lessons coming up as we explore these different folks in the Bible and how they did walk by faith and the adventure they had and what that looked like. So I don't know about y'all, but I thought it would be exciting. I'm excited about it. Excited about bringing it with you. But this morning, as I said already, we're looking at the life of Noah, and the title of our lesson is Noah, a faith that pleases God. And the point of our lesson is that living by faith begins with a righteous relationship with God. And so the question that we've got, I think we'll have some great, I hope we have some great discussion and conversation about it. But the first question this morning says, what's the biggest, I must be crazy to be doing this, risk you've ever taken? Does anybody want to share? April said get married. I think that's I think we all can kind of agree with that to some point for sure. Anybody else?
I guess when you're having kids.
Yeah, that's I could go into a lot of detail, 5 details on that one, but for sure, Carla.
Leaving home and going to college.
That's a big one.
I ain't never looked at it like I must be crazy. I always looked at it like they probably think I'm crazy.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely, Mark. No, that's a pretty valid point. The one that when I read this, the first thing that came to my mind was, I think a lot of y'all knew, but last summer, at the beginning of the summer, Felicia and I went to Ireland, and well, the first part is that I had never been on an airplane. I was terrified, like literally terrified, and I remember sitting on that plane and it first started moving, and I thought, "There's no way I can do this. This cannot happen." And well, then as soon as it took off, I just looked out the window, and you were just immediately way off the ground. And as soon as I looked out the window and seen that, I thought, "Well, ain't nothing I can do now," and I was fine. And and I loved it. I loved it after that. I had zero issues with it. But the other one with me was when we got to Ireland. All Felicia and I had was we had a plane ticket and a rental car, and that's, I knew that they drove on the other side of the road, and I knew that the steering wheel was on the other side of the car, but I didn't figure it'd be that big a deal, they don't make anything, they don't make an automatic over there, so it's a straight drive, so, sitting on the other side of the car with the clutch and brake and gas, but then you're changing gears with your left hand instead of your right. But then the whole act of actually driving on the other side of the road, and after about an hour, I told Felicia, I said, this is by far the sketchiest thing I've ever done in my whole life. So that's definitely one, 2 of the big ones for me. But
getting on a ship like on the ocean that's to me the way you look at an airplane.
yeah.
So I never ridden a ship as a result. But I thought, well, I can ride this ferry boat. I'm fine with this.
Yeah.
And then when we got on that thing, have you ever ridden one?
Oh yeah, one.
Ooh, you're up in the air most of the time. You hit the water a little bit. So
I love riding on a ferry.
I thought it was kind of fun too, but I was kind of like what Jason said. What am I doing?
Yeah.
I can't do nothing now.
That's the one
I'm at the mercy of the driver.
Anybody else want to share? That'd be great.
I'm getting ready to have another scary one. I've got a soon-be 15-year-old grandson I'm going to have to learn to drive.
Oh yeah. Those are
So I got to find a stick shift because that's what I'm going to teach him on.
Oh, I wish Felicia was here. She'd tell you about Kathleen. She was practicing driving with Kathleen about 3 weeks ago, and they were going out Grassy Creek Road and coming up with a stop sign there at 16, and Kathleen was just kept on going. Felicia said, "Brake, brake, brake, brake." Well, she hit the gas. And just went, Dukes of Hazzard straight across 16, and went on up through the parking lot of the State Line store. But Felicia said it's just miracle there wasn't nobody crossing 16. So, yeah, talk to Felicia, girl, as you can see.
Well, I
She
made,
tell you how to hold on real tight.
yeah, I done it with the kids. We made them learn to drive every vehicle we had,
Yeah,
so.
and I think that's great. You know, all the boys driving was something they always just, I mean, time they was 6 years old, they wanted to drive something, and so Kathleen always said all she was gonna do is ride a horse, and she didn't ever want a vehicle, but now she's changed her mind, so maybe we should have started back at 6. Anybody else?
Felt like me, Jason, when James told me, James said, there's the brakes, and that's when I hit the pedals.
Yeah,
I mean, the guy's pedaling, here I went.
it's scary, it's a risk. Anybody else wanna share anything?
Well, I had an accident one time, my ex-boyfriend I was going with told me to wash the car. Well, I washed the car, and I backed it up good, but when I went to go forwards, I hit a big old place out of Joe's cheese trailer and knocked it down. He just laughed at me. He didn't say anything. Hold the trailer. And I'm okay, I never.
Hey Jason, setting a climb line for 1,000 Marines, at 7 foot, you look down, you're climbing, and every 10 foot you put an anchor in, you get to 700 foot, and you're like looking down, you're like, what am I doing up here?
I can't imagine.
You know,
That's,
because it's gotta be good, because 1,000 Marines are gonna go up it, you know, so, did that in 87.
that's pretty sketchy there, Mark. I have to agree.
Jason, you ever run a red light?
Have I, one time that I realized, that I remember.
Did.
Have you?
Funniest thing, I had my friend with me, and she said,
Randy did, Barbara's nephew.
I'd set for the green light, and then when it turned red, I took off. She said, you just ran a red light. I said, I did? Oh, yeah. I'm mad.
That's scary, thankful too, but no, that's funny.
And another time I'd done it, she said, "That's the time," I said, that's okay.
It's all right.
With him.
Yeah, that's for sure. Or in Chicago, Franklin, we've gotten 2 letters from Chicago. They got, cameras, and all Franklin still comes home. And, he's gotten 2, and they just send a picture of your car, like,
Oh, yeah.
go, they show the light and show your car, and they just give you a ticket, and.
That's bad in Tennessee.
Yeah, that don't even seem fair to me, really, though. If they ain't somebody there to catch you, I don't see how you can get a ticket. That's exactly right. No, they just issue it, so it's like $120 ticket.
Oh, yeah,
They just send you a ticket and a picture.
Then they got that in Tennessee when Savannah's in school.
Yeah,
She said, I think I can make this. She made it, but they still got her.
yes,
She didn't, it turned red before the whole car was through.
and they send her a picture and a
Yeah,
ticket.
she had to pay.
Yeah, that don't, like I said, that don't seem fair to me.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Well, guys, these,
Well, I never ran no red light, but I drove pretty good in an apartment, but that time I just didn't do no good. And I seen a little boy on the commercial yesterday, and they was washing some clothes. And he had on a shirt, and that little boy said, "Daddy, you stink."
that's funny. Well, guys, we've all shared, these are risks that we take. I do want to throw something out there though, and I think right now is as good a time to do it as any. You know, the title of this quarter, or the first part of it, is Risk Takers, the Adventures of Walking by Faith. And I just want to ask, what's the definition of risk? Does anybody want to throw a stab at it? Y'all want me to tell you? I'll be glad to. But if you look up risk, the definition of it, it says a situation involving exposure to danger.
That's riding with Louise.
Amen.
But that's what the definition of risk is a situation involving exposure to danger. And you know what? I was thinking about the title of these lessons, and I thought, I don't agree with this title. Because if we go by the definition, a situation involving exposure to danger, the risk is not living faithfully. Would y'all agree with that? And especially this is evident in our lesson this morning about Noah. I love the second part of the title of our lessons, which says the adventure of walking by faith. But I don't agree with the first part that it calls these people risk takers. Because I think the risk taker are those that don't walk by faith. Would y'all agree? Or does that just come up to me?
They just don't realize it.
They don't realize it. But I think April's exactly right. But that just is something that hit me. But I want to keep going back to that a few times this morning. Anyway, so let's go ahead and we're going to get into this story of Noah. We're going to get into the title of Faith That Pleases God. So let's look at our first group of verses. Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 through 9. And verse 5 says, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God." And so we see in this story, and as we look at our lesson this morning, as we look at these verses, I feel like most of us have heard the story of Noah. Is that an accurate assumption? Do you realize, I Googled this, that almost 90-some%, I can't remember the exact number, so don't quote me, but 90-some% of Americans, whether Christians or not, recognize the story of Noah. We agree. Can you agree with that? That's probably an accurate statement. The other thing that's interesting about the story of Noah is that in other ancient writings, and they speak of a flood. They speak of a disaster that wiped off humanity and one family surviving. I think that's interesting. Do y'all find that interesting? I mean, I find that very, very interesting that in ancient literature, in ancient writings, that they also make account of a disaster that wiped off everything, every living creature on earth except for one family. And so I think it goes to validate this story. But if we look at these verses, it says, "And God saw that the wickedness of man," if we go to the verse 5, it says, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." So, going back to what I said about risk takers, who are the risk takers in this story? If you go by the definition, those that didn't obey God. If you go by the definition that a risk is a situation involving exposure to danger, the ones that weren't obedient were the risk takers, because God saw them, saw they wasn't obedient. And then we see that in verse 6 it says, "And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart." If you go earlier on in these chapters, in this chapter 6, it kind of explains what was going on. Verses 1 through 4 gives an explanation of what God looked down and seen his creation and seen humankind and what they were doing. It ultimately was two main things. One was sexual immorality, and the other one was violence and hatred. And that's what God saw, and that's what repented his heart, that the people that he had created had turned to this being their way of life. And so when we look at verse 5, it says, God saw the wickedness of man was great, the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. When we don't obey God, who do we obey?
Ourselves.
You ever thought about that? Carlotta's exactly right. When we don't obey God, we obey ourselves. There's no gray area. There's no fence walking. Those are the only two possibilities. A lot of times we don't look at it that way, do we?
If we don't obey ourselves, we won't, well, how'd that go? I don't know.
It's okay, Linda. Sometimes we can say, oh, and there's actually a question, I guess it's our second question in our material. It says, in what areas of our culture are believers pressured to follow the crowd?
Social media.
Oh, absolutely. Social media. But, you know, as I read that question and think about these verses, when we choose to follow the crowd, we can sometimes, we'll then blame the crowd if we get in trouble. Has any of us ever done that? Boy, I did it when I was in high school. Anybody else? I mean,
Yeah, I've got in trouble before
I did too, Linda.
on the school bus. I think it, June Blaine was this, it's aggravating. I might have hit him with a sharp clipboard and turn around and hit Dale.
Now, I understand that.
No, Dale kept pulling your hair. He
kept
kept
pulling
pulling
my
her
hair,
hair, and Linda
I
put
hit
a
him with the
clipboard at him,
clipboard.
and he cut her head right there. Well, the principal just told him to go to his room. He didn't do nothing to him. He said, "You'll learn next time not to pull her hair."
Sounds like that's a pretty good decision. But, you know, it's easy for us to make excuses when we don't obey. We say we follow this or we follow that, we follow this teaching or that teaching, but ultimately it came down to our decision about us. And so, going back to how I started with this, is that we either obey God or we obey ourselves. I believe that's 100% true. And so, the people that were living on the earth at the time of Noah, it says that the wickedness of them was great. They had chosen to obey themselves. You know, it goes all the way, we can spend a lot of time on the first, but it goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. It goes back to the garden. It goes back to Cain and Abel. It goes back to Seth. It goes back to all there, but people had began to choose to obey themselves. And that is ultimately what's happened without going in further back in history. And it says in verse 7, and the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and creeping thing and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. So what did the Lord decide to do?
Flood.
Destroy the world.
Destroy the world. Men and what else, Chloe?
And if they could find one person, he wouldn't.
And he did.
Noah was the only.
That's right. That's exactly right. You know, Chloe's jumped ahead just a little, but something that struck me out of those verses, not only did God, because of disobedience, God chose to destroy man, but like Chloe said, the world, which was all the living things. Does that seem fair to you?
Well, they had a chance.
The people did, but how about the living things? I'm sorry, I may have misunderstood. Has that ever struck anybody else? That all the animals
curious why.
Well, they took 2 by 2.
Back on the ark, you're right, Chloe. But all the rest of them perished. This thing, I don't.
Well, they couldn't put all of them on the boat.
No, that'd been a big boat.
That's what I was thinking.
But you know, the point that I wanted to make out of making that little statement: when we disobey, does it only hurt us?
No, it hurts everybody.
You follow me?
Involves a lot of people.
A lot of people and a lot of creation.
If you ever get a chance to see that play in Pennsylvania of Noah, it is so great.
I'm sure it was.
And they had the animals coming in, the people on each aisle coming and getting in the ship, and showed him creating, making the ship and all, and them laughing at him and making fun of him. And then when the rain started coming and all, and he shut the door and they couldn't get in.
That's right.
But it was amazing to watch that. It was in live people,
Yeah,
and it was great.
I'm sure it was. I bet that was awesome.
Jason, if he didn't destroy everything on Earth, if he'd have actually fixed an area for the animals, how many people would have been up there shoving animals off in the water?
It very well could have been. I just, you know, as I was reading these verses, as I was thinking, that was just a point that, you know, that did hit me. That it's not, our disobedience doesn't just bring me, it affects lots of different things around us that I think a lot of times we don't think about in the moment. And I guarantee all of us have been in that. You think, oh, whatever I'm doing, it's just about me. But is it ever just about you? Does it not ever affect our spouse, our parents, our children? It truly does. And I think, I don't know, I took that out of verse 7, that, you know, because of humankind's disobedience to God, all living creatures suffered because of it. And that's something that I took out of it personally.
And then too, the animals are been lower than man, you know, so that they weren't to be
Yeah, he could have left a couple off the ark like the stink bug.
Skiers, I'm all about that too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yellow jackets, he could have left them on.
Jason, when I read the story of Noah, and when, you know, God told him to build the ark, well, he built the ark, he got the ark loaded, then he told him in 7 days it's gonna rain. What if Noah would have got discouraged and says, no, I'm not doing this, and unloaded the ark? And when I read something like that, my mind is always going through different scenarios, like what if? But you know, what if Noah had got discouraged when he told him now the rain will start in 7 days? He had to wait 7 days on the boat with all those animals.
With nothing happening.
With nothing
I
happening.
mean, that's a very, very great point, Danny. How many of us, I mean, that is a really good
We'll
point.
talk about teaching somebody patience, that'll do it.
And it shows his obedience. That's a great point. Because if any one of us, if that would have been us, we might have said,
I would abandon ship, I'm just gonna be honest.
ain't nothing gonna happen.
Yeah.
That's a great point. So let's keep on going. In verse 8 it says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And it says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generation, and Noah walked with God. So as God looked down upon the earth, he saw that man had become disobedient and only obedient to themselves, but yet he finds this one man, and it being Noah. And it says that Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. But before we get to that, it says, but Noah found what in verse 8?
Grace.
Grace. But Noah found grace. I think that's written specifically. Did grace find Noah?
Nope.
Do you see the difference? Grace didn't find Noah. Noah found grace. It's the same way in our lives. It's the same way with what Jesus Christ. I didn't do anything to deserve the grace. I didn't do anything to deserve the grace. But I found grace because of Christ's love for me. Noah found grace because of God's love for him. For God's love for his family. That's how Noah found grace. And it says these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. Did this mean that Noah had never done anything wrong?
No.
No. But it meant that he was a just man and that he was actively obedient to God. And he was being obedient. And then I love the last part of this verse, and I don't know, that's something that just struck me, but it says, and Noah walked with God. Is walking with someone a choice?
Yes.
Would y'all not agree?
Yeah.
I choose to walk with God, or I choose not to walk with God. It says that Noah chose to walk with God, and he was walking with God. And the thing that I think is interesting, if we go back to Genesis chapter 5, we see this very same reference about a man called Enoch. And it says that Enoch walked with God, and then one of my favorite little quotes, it says, and then he was not. That he walked with God. That's the only other that I'm aware of. I don't know that there's any other references in the Bible that says someone walked with God, just like that. But it said Enoch walked with God, and then Enoch was not. That God actually took Enoch because of his relationship with God. He didn't die, he just went to be with God. And then here it says that Noah walked with God, and because Noah walked with God, what happened to Noah?
God saved him.
He saved him. He spared him because of Noah's obedience and him walking with God. Any more discussion on verses 5 through 9?
Jason, God laid it on my heart the first of the year of the case of, give me all or give me nothing.
That's a great point. I love that. Yeah, that's very, very good. And if we can, Carlotta's made this statement and this point. A lot of times we want some. We want some, but we want all, but are we willing to give all in return?
Sometimes not.
And I think that's a great point. You know, going back to what you just said, Carlotta, I chose not to bring this up because but the beginning of our material, when there's a section there talking about our faith being like an investment. That if you invest money in something, you invest in high risk or low risk, and if you invest in high risk, you're hoping to get high reward. If you bet, I chose not to do that because I'm going back to my definition of risk that I said. I didn't think that correlated in my mind, but there is a little bit of something to it. Because sometimes we want to just give just a little. And then we expect a lot. I mean, is that not sometimes what we do? And so if going back to that example that was in the front of our material, if we want a lot from God, we need to be willing to give a lot and invest a lot. And investing requires faith. It requires trust. Exactly right. But I think that's a great point, Carl. Anybody Anybody else before we go on? All right, verse 17. So we're skipping a few verses. So the verses that we've skipped, verses 10 through 17 or 16, is God giving Noah the instructions of how to build this boat. And that's what is happening in verses 10 through 16. God was very specific. He tells him exactly how long, exactly how wide, exactly how tall, where to put the door, where to put the roof, and how big the roof should be. Very specific instructions that God gives Noah as to how to build this boat. I mean, we could have a lot of fun, I think, with verses 10 through 16. At least I can in my mind, because, you know, there wasn't no paper back then that we're really aware of. And I'm sure that God just didn't draw it out with, you know, page 1 says do A, B, C, D, E, F.
He probably wouldn't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't think that was what Noah had. Instead, Noah was given a width, height, length, and here you go. I mean, I love the part, and I think my favorite part in verses 10 through 16 is that God tells him to put the door between the second and third decks. Now, I mean, we don't know if Noah was a boat builder. We don't know exactly what his background was, but, you know, I'd have been like, come on, Lord, I need a little more. I mean, well,
I've always tried to picture somebody measuring it out, you know, the cubit, and you lay down and you measure it.
yeah, one at a time. I don't know. I just think verses 10 through 16 are funny for that reason. I think they're interesting and they're neat to read. If I didn't know, I'd be like, Lord, you know, I mean.
I think you're hitting on what the risk was. It's from a worldly context. Like, it don't sound like a risk to us because we have faith in our faith. But from a worldly view, the investment he made and the years and just doing what he was doing for no apparent reason other than he felt like he was led to do it. I think that's their context of trying to say the risk, just when you're going against everybody else, or not doing what everybody else would do in that situation. I don't know.
Marty, I think you're right. I mean, that is and that's their whole point of the idea of the risk is that.
I mean, we're sitting here laughing at what he probably looked like doing this, and we wasn't even there.
That's exactly right. That's a great point. I mean, that's a great point.
But think about what he went through building it. The people there were laughing at him, calling him crazy and everything else.
Absolutely.
And them not realizing just how much knowledge God was giving Noah
Absolutely.
at the time. He had to.
That's a great point, Carl.
And I
He had
think
to
it
put
comes down to what Carlotta said. Give him your all or none.
That's right.
If he gave us his all, we should give him our all.
Guys, it's a neat story when you really. I know we had the opportunity to go visit the Ark down in Kentucky, and I mean when you really see it, but you know if you look at the dimensions that are given in verses 10 through 16, I mean it's roughly the size of the Titanic that this boat that Noah built, again we don't know Noah's background, we don't know what he was, but regardless, that would have been a tremendous task at that time to build something of that size and of those dimensions, and it is kind of cool when you really think about it. What Noah did is really a neat part of the story, verses 10 through 16. But anyway, so Noah is instructed to build the ark, and then we find ourselves, and he's instructed how to build it, and then we find ourselves in verses 17, and it says, "And behold, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life, from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee, and of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be they shall be male and female, of fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind. 2 of every sort shall come unto thee to keep them alive. And take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them. Thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him, so did he. So God tells us in verse 17, or God tells Noah, and we see it in verse 17, God says, and behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall perish, shall die. And so that's what God tells Noah. Noah, the reason that you need to build this ark is, verses 10 through 16, he tells him the sizes, he tells him what he needs to do, and then in verse 17 he says, Noah, and you have to do this because I, even I. Has anybody caught that in verse 17? God says, I, even I. Why did he do it twice like that, do y'all think? Emphasis, and what's the emphasis on, Lonnie, in your opinion?
He.
Exactly.
And the other thing is that what you pull out of this, if you don't really realize, we were talking in the last set of verses, why did God destroy the animals? The method precluded doing anything different.
That's a great point.
I mean, there's no choice.
There's no other way. And, I mean, I think that's a very, very good point. But I think Lonnie's right on that, in my opinion, I think that God said, I, even I, because what's human nature? Let's just be real. You say that again?
Take credit.
Take credit, yes, but also
Nature did it.
that too. Did y'all hear what Lonnie said? Nature did. Would that be a Bible? Could Noah think that? At some point, yes, we're all, and some of y'all sitting here kind of staring, but guys, do you not realize, maybe y'all don't do this. Jason does this. Okay? So just follow what Jason does sometimes. Something happens, and I say, oh yeah, that was, it just happened. It just occurred. I don't really think about why it occurred. I don't think about how it occurred. It just happens. And you deal with what happens. I mean, is Helene a great example or what?
Well, everything happens with a purpose.
And I think Carlotta's, I think you're right. Everything, I don't know. That's an interesting question. Carlotta said everything happens with a purpose. What do y'all think?
If it wasn't intended to happen, then God wouldn't have let it happen.
Now, Carlotta, I don't know that that's 100%. I don't know. What do y'all think?
Maybe he's referring to Noah found grace, but then even I will destroy everything. I give grace on this hand, but then I'm taking, this has got to happen too.
I think that's a valid point, Mark. But I think let's go back to Carlotta's thing.
Do we think it's fair to say God comes to Helene?
God might have not intended, for Helene.
Deliberately sent Helene.
And I know what I believe, and I think that's all. I'll share what I believe. I believe things happen because we're in a fallen world.
Really?
And
It was man's fault.
But I go back
Yeah.
to me personally. I go to Romans 8:28. which says all things work together for good for those that love God and are called according to his purpose. I think God can use any situation in our life to work to good, but I don't believe that God calls those situations to happen. That's my personal belief. Now, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying that's what I believe. I believe that if you take the Helene, for example, we live in a world that things happen, and some things are good and some things are bad, but then God can use those things in our lives to work to good. That God didn't make that happen.
No.
And that's my belief. Please don't judge me, guys. I'm just telling you what I believe.
It's just like with 9/11. After that all happened, it seemed like everything changed. After that, thoughts changed.
And I think and Helene could be viewed the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at what our church was able to do, the people our church was able to witness and minister to, that would not have happened had there. But I don't think God made Helene happen in order for that to happen.
No.
I think, and again, I'm telling you
That's not what I meant with God making it happen.
That's right.
Yeah, everything happens with a purpose. That purpose might have been man's own destruction of earth itself. We don't treat earth very well.
No, you're right. You're 100% right. Y'all want to keep running this rabbit, or y'all want to?
Now go ahead and go something else. Let's talk about why he put stink bugs and yellow jackets on the ark.
I'm good whatever direction we want to go. I think it's great points. I think it's great that, I know I've told you before, that's what Sunday school's about, in my opinion. Let's throw ideas out, and we think about them, and we read in the Bible about them, and that's what makes Sunday school fun to me.
We learn from each other.
That's exactly right. I'm not saying I'm right. Please don't never. I know I've told you all a million times. Just because I say something, Lordy mercy, I say lots of stuff that I'm pretty darn sure ain't right.
We know that God deliberately caused the flood, but we can't apply that to every other situation that has happened in a destructive situation.
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly what I think. And not saying that I'm right, but I believe that's the case. But in this case, God said, I'm sending this book. God said, this is from me. God said, this is why I'm doing it. Because man had grown so disobedient, so sinful, and they had completely turned away from God, that God did this. And so then in verse 17, God tells Noah the reason this flood's happening. And then in verse 18, he says, But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife and thy sons' wives with thee. And he goes on to say in verse 19, so in verse 18, God says, But Noah, I'm sparing you, that you and your wife and your sons' wives will be on this ark. And then in verse 19, he says, And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark. So he not only says, Noah, I'm going to spare you, but going back to the living creatures, I'm also going to spare the living creatures. This is how I'm going to do it. I think it's also interesting, if you go on in Genesis chapter 6, or in 7, you find that God also told Noah that he uses the form clean animals. So it's not only a pair, a male and a female of each kind, but then of the clean animals that, is your cattle, your sheep, the animals that were used to eat. He said 5 pairs of them. That of each of those types of animals to be on the ark. So that was God's way of preserving mankind and the animal life.
Can you imagine the faith that they had to have of all of those animals, and some of them were man-eaters? Why didn't they? That would have been the one thing that would scare me. What if they decide to attack?
Say that now.
God brought him there, and he.
And I think April said, and I've always loved the idea of I don't know about y'all, I love the picture. I don't think Noah went out and got these animals. I don't personally think he did that. I think these animals just showed up. I think God, now think about what I'm saying. You know, all animals can be trained. All animals are, you know, and I think these animals just showed up. I think Noah had his hands full building his boat. I don't think he had time to go and wrangle. And so, and I do agree. I believe what April said. I believe that their mouths were shut. They were timid, and you know, I think that's very, very much so is what I believe. But it's fun to think about, isn't it? I mean, it really is. Verse 20 says, of all the fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, and of every creeping thing on the earth, going back to Colossians point, why? After his kind, and 2 of every sort shall come into thee to keep them alive. And take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be food for thee and for them. Thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, so did he. The other interesting point about this, I think it's interesting. I don't know how old Noah was.
He was in his 90s, wasn't
Oh, 600.
600?
He was 600 years old when this was called. Now just think about that. I mean, he wasn't no spring chicken. I mean, he'd been here a while. Say what? Yeah, middle age is what it was. So I think that's a great point. I think it's fun to think about that. You know, if you look, and I've, you know, you can read when you go to the Ark Encounter in Kentucky and read things there, but just doing as an observation. I've been here, I've already explained how amazing it was that I think Noah built this boat with these directions. But can we really imagine if you had 600 years of life experience? Could you learn to do a lot of different things in 600 years?
Can you imagine him walking with God for 600 years?
No, absolutely. And I think that's, what a better point than what I made. I'm sorry. I mean, yeah, you're exactly right. But sometimes we can think that, well, how did he know how to do it? How could they have known how to do it? But if you essentially had 7 or 8 lifetimes up until then to learn different things, what all could you learn? You know, there wasn't television. There wasn't books to read. So if you were wanting to learn how to build a boat, well, you learned how to build a boat. You had people around you that had been here for 600-700 years, and they to teach you and to help you learn. So I think that's a neat point about this. Let's jump ahead to our last group of verses because it's about time to call it.
Joyce, I ran across an interesting, not because of this lesson thing that's really, it was talking about God told them how to put the pitch and all, to seal it up. But being men, you know, they could have missed a spot or whatever. How did it survive? I mean, these guys saying God shut the door. So God shuts the door from outside the world, and that's what he took care of. It wasn't the man, it was God.
Well, Abel's just brought up a very important point. No, it's great. It does say, and I love that part. It says when they got in that God shut the door. The thing that I was thinking about though, God could have easily done this and a boat showed up, right? Do y'all believe that? I think so. But when you talk about the title of our lesson and that Noah, as a, I'm not going to say a risk taker, I've already told you why, but as a living a life of faith and the adventure that brought on, he laid that on Noah's feet to show the faith of Noah, for us to see the faith of Noah that he did. I believe God could have, I believe he could have just picked him up, held him in the air for 40 days with all the animals he wanted to save and set them back down. I believe God could do that.
Well, God had already experienced Noah's obedience, so he knew that Noah would do what he asked him to.
And Noah did do. And so as a picture for us, for future generations, to say, as living life of faith, and of, you know, if you want to go to our title, an adventure, no, we can have that example in our own lives. Oh,
But was there a chance for salvation during that time? Is what I was always wondering.
mean, you would think so, but
I mean, surely the one there thought was evil. I mean, Noah was this big.
But April, to your point, April, you said surely everybody was evil, but I think if you read what God wrote, I think everybody was.
It's just hard to imagine.
It is hard to imagine. Very hard. All right, I want to read our last few verses in great conversation. Genesis chapter 8, verses 20 through 22. What's happened is the flood waters have came, the flood waters have receded, and now we find ourselves with Noah and his family. And verse 20 says, And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. We see this is the conclusion of the Noah story, not the whole Noah story, but the part of the flood. The flood is receded, and Noah goes and he builds an altar. You know, we've talked the last, I think 3 weeks about this altar building. Not maybe not in our lesson but once, but I keep going back to the Naaman that came and met with Elisha. And, you know, Elisha healed him of his leprosy. And Naaman asked Elisha to give him 2 donkey loads worth of dirt so he could take it with him to his home to build an altar for God. And we talked about it last week, and I don't even remember why. But then we see it again this week that Noah building an altar unto the Lord. I hope everybody's kind of getting a little bit of a point how important it is that we do make an altar. That we do make, when God works in our lives, we don't have to dig up dirt, we don't have to find rocks, but let something be a reminder of what God did on that occasion. What he did on the next occasion, because it is so important to give us something to come back to. Because, you know, we are a very forgetful people. I don't think it's just Jason. Because I have the benefit of reading through the Bible and seeing lots of other people that fall guilty of the same thing I do. Because, you know, see, if I was Noah, and this had just happened to me, and I've got off this ark, and I've built an altar, and then it started raining again tomorrow, I'd be like, ding, dang, it's raining again. Does anybody, do y'all follow me? And or if I had just gotten off that boat, and then the next day, you know, I break my leg, and everything's against me. Does anybody else besides me fall guilty? I know, please don't raise your hand. I know we do. Because, again, we have the Bible that we can read and see example after example after example of other people that have that same problem. And I think altars are so important because when I do break my leg the day after God just saved me from a flood, and I say, dang it, woe is me, it's only me, why does this happen to me? Then once I get through my period of moping, then I can look back at that and think, you know what, God got me through this. And he's going to get me through that. I think altars are so critical. Again, I'm not meaning dirt altars. I mean remembrance altars that we think and go back to that, you know, God got me through this. God worked in this area. And then after I mope around a minute, I can look back to that and say, wait a minute, God pulled me there, he's going to pull me here. He's going to get me through here too. And we see that Noah is doing that, and he builds this altar, and then he offers up these different animals as burnt offerings. And then Lord makes a covenant. You know, this is a very, very special covenant. I didn't really get it till this week. Because in thousands of years, God has 100% kept this covenant. That he would not destroy the earth again. And I think that's pretty crucial. And I think the other part of that, it says
that God says, I will not curse the ground anymore for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is what?
Said the next time would be hard work.
Well, it says that their heart is, we are evil from our youth, that we are sinful people, and therefore it won't happen to you. So, anyway, guys, anything else before we close this morning? If not, I sure appreciate you. Look forward to next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about Joshua. So, look forward to being with you next week. Thank y'all.